Hello everyone, Joe here, and sorry I can't do my usual intro today, but today, I know I said today twice, I am so sorry I'm getting redundant in my old age, but I will be doing my college assignment and posting it here in video form in case you're interested. Probably not, but it's worth a shot. I get it, because, shot types? Shot? No? Oh, okay. So first, let's talk about Citizen Kane. Now, this film has often been regarded as the greatest movie of all time, and yeah, I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't up there. A good reason for this might be that it introduced a lot of filmmaking techniques that weren't seen in previous films. One of which being the graphical match. Now, in the first few establishing shots of the film, we're shown the house from multiple different perspectives, but the perspectives look different. So, how can we tell that we're always looking at the same house? I'm gonna tell you, okay? Because of the light shining from the window. And that light is your guide to the fact that you're focusing on the same thing and getting closer to it, while also giving more detail to the landscape outside. That is the definition of a graphical match, something that remains on screen that carries you through to the next shot. Truly a unique visionary. Now let's look at another example of a match on action from the movie Crash. Why is it called match on action? I have no clue, because it's a fancy film term that no one else will understand. So, let me make it easier for you. A match on action is defined as the movement of a character or object that's carried over from one shot to the other. Observe.
You know what those are?
Can I have them?
Did you see any white people in there waiting an hour and 32 minutes for a plate of spaghetti?
Heh. Racist. But that's not the point. The point is that when the character in the scene is opening the door, the film then cuts to a new scene of someone else doing the exact same thing. But the actions follow one after the other to look like they're the same, only to reveal that they're not. It's a clever trick that's still being used today. Parallel editing. Remember those horrible days of math class? A time where when you were chatting with friends or exchanging smiles with a girl you fancied, you were being told what parallel lines were. Well, I hope you held on to that information, because this is very similar, only it might not bore you as much. Parallel lines run alongside each other and don't ever meet up, exactly like these two scenes from The Silence of the Lambs. Now, if you haven't seen this film, then I don't know what you're doing here, but let me fill you in case you haven't. After the police arrive at this house, it looks like they're gonna bust in and catch Buffalo Bill. But wait, that's not them at the door. Oh my god, they got the wrong place. The scene tricks us by using, wait for it, parallel editing! The editor makes two separate scenes look like the same one by placing key moments back and forth between each other, like showing the police outside the house and Buffalo Bill inside, the doorbell ringing at the same time and showing the police's patience wearing out the longer he takes to get to the door, only to show that it's actually Clarice who answers the door, clearly demonstrating that these are two different things happening at the same time. It's a neat trick that actually anyone can do. Now I'm going to talk about something very similar to parallel editing, known as cross-cutting, from one of the greatest movies of all time, The Godfather. Now someone could actually look at this and see it as parallel editing, because you're seeing the parallels of the two different scenes, between Michael baptizing his child, oathing that he believes in God and renounces the devil, while his men are ruthlessly killing his enemies one by one. But the difference is that this isn't tricking you into thinking that this is the same scene, cutting back and forth, between the same thing happening at two different locations. This is just making a correlation between two opposite scenes to add clarity to each of them and enhance the viewing experience. You see this all the time, something that doesn't fit with something else being put together with it, and I'm not sure why this works so well. Maybe it's because when something nice is put over something horrible, we subconsciously feel that the nice nature is trying to shelter or distract us from what's really going on, and that just makes us feel even more uncomfortable. Or maybe the creators were high, I don't know. But what I do know is that the overlapping of the church music, the loud gunshots, and the emphasis on violent realism makes this scene an iconic piece that's recognised amongst film buffs everywhere. Now, Breathless is an old French movie that most of you might not have heard of before. But a bit of background on this is that the director of the film had to cut down on footage to make the movie shorter, but he did it in a way that was actually experimented on later filmmakers. Now you see the woman exit the building and she's about to cross the road to get to the car, but the film just cuts to her across the road. It doesn't actually show her crossing the road, but it doesn't need to because you can still tell that that's what it did. And in later areas of the film, it does it in a way that actually does something further. Like when they're driving in the car, it cuts to different locations to show the passing of time. And this is used all the time in films, particularly today, as it was more experimented on. Now, let's take a look at Hunger Games. Now, as overrated as this film is, that doesn't mean that it doesn't get its basic shot types down, such as the reverse shot. Now, this shot isn't complicated, just cut back and forth between the two different over-the-shoulder shots. Or that sometimes they don't have to be over-the-shoulder, they can be point of views. But the point is that it cuts back and forth between the perspectives of two different characters in a certain conversation. And it's used all the time when it doesn't want to show off any weird angles or big fancy tricks and whatever. Simple, but effective. But while something like that might be easily noticeable, what's perhaps not as noticeable is an eyeline match in this scene from Back to the Future, where Marty McFly looks at his dog and the camera keeps the eyeline of the two of them, but then Marty looks at something off-screen that the audience is expected to look at from there, and he looks at something that is not only off-screen, but out of the eyeline that the camera is keeping place. That's where you get into a little bit more complicated territory. But what most audiences don't realise, though, is that the things that might seem like complicated methods to them are actually basic 101 methods of filmmaking to the professionals. For example, the 180-degree rule is a 101 for any filmmaker. You might notice this particularly in action sequences, but any scene has to get this rule down. Basically, imagine an invisible line planted down the entirety of the space. The camera does not cross that line at all, because if you have the camera's perspective here, looking at two people across, and then say you cut to the other side, it's gonna look like they're on opposite sides. So basically you're gonna make your viewers cross-eyed and they're not gonna know what the hell's going on. And that's one thing you don't do. You don't disorientate your viewer, unless you're doing it deliberately or for a specific purpose. But then you might be asking, doesn't this limit the amount of shots that you can make? What if you want to do something more than just plant the camera in one place? Well, what you can do from there, you might not be able to go past the 180-degree line, but what you can do is move up to it and shoot to the left side or the right side of any specific view that you want, on top of shooting directly forwards. And if you don't just cut to this place, but you move the camera over to it, then by doing that, you're establishing a new 180-degree line, going across the other one that you just came by. This allows you to move around and get any shot that you want to without disorientating your viewer. Now, as important as I said it is to break this rule, there are actually times where filmmakers can break it, but like I said before, it has to be done for a specific purpose. For example, in this scene from The Dark Knight, the 180-degree rule is broken. First of all, because the characters, and obviously the camera with it, move positions, and not cutting away straight from it, but rather moving along with it, allows you to not disorientate your viewer. But on top of that, the camera does cut to a position on the other side of the 180-degree line, but this doesn't disorientate the viewer, however, because you can see that you're looking at the perspective of the police officers on the other side of the wall. But whilst there is a lot of technique in cutting back and forth between two different shots that can add a lot to the filmmaking technique, other great examples of editing technique come in transitions that you can use. And one that is extremely effective, but not noticed by many people that often, and this is where one scene dissolves into the other. And this creates a third image, with the scene that you're about to cut to overlapping the one that we're seeing before. And in doing this, the audience subconsciously reflects on both of those scenes and how they connect to each other. It's very clever. Another editing transition are wipes. Not as effective as the third shot, but still just allows to cut from one scene to the other. Now, it was quite experimental at the time that it was being used, and isn't seen much anymore, but it was seen a lot in Star Wars, and it uses it so much that it has become practically a staple of the franchise. I mean, look at how many wipes it used. It wiped so much that it could almost clean up the mess that was Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Almost. A split screen is a device that was also experimented a lot, particularly in the 70s and 80s. In 80s case, it was on TV. Now, when some people see this, they see it as kind of gimmicky, and I can see why, but when it works, it can be really effective. The point is to show two people or two things happening simultaneously at the same time. And when you do this, you don't have to cut back and forth between the two different things happening because, well, the audience is seeing them on screen at the same time. And it can be done when the editor particularly wants the viewer to see two things happening at the same time between the two people. Maybe it's done when something important is going on at two different places, or maybe it could be done when two people are having a conversation over the phone. Wipes and split screen aren't really seen as much anymore because they're seen as kind of gimmicky. Freeze frames are still going on today since they've been used, probably in the early 20s. Yeah, that early. Normally it freezes on a specific shot when it wants to exit the scene or even the entire film, but some of it can be done not to exit but actually to introduce. Like this scene, for example, where the camera freezes on specific images of the characters and does what it likes to them in a kind of badass way of introducing them. But in a way, I kind of feel sorry for the people this happens to. I mean, how would you like it if you kept freezing in places you didn't want to and you couldn't move? Will you knock it off? Slow motion has also been used so much since it's experimented with that it's almost become something of a cliche. But that's because the ways they were being used were so effective. Because it not only allows the audience to see things in much more big and grand detail, but it also builds up the tension. Because things are slowed down and they're not moving at the pace that it should, it puts the audience on the edge of their seat more. Oh my god, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? Ah, they made it. Now, when you think of montages, you'll most likely think of music videos and things like that, but they're also used in film as well. But while all of the other editing techniques that we've gone through so far are used to keep the scenes and shots in continuity, this one is done to show the effects of them outside of continuity. It cuts between different characters doing different things, maybe at the same time, but sometimes at the passage of time as well, but they do not keep in continuity with each other, and it's done in a way that does not disorientate the viewer, and not leave them confused as to what's going on. But the most famous example of this comes from the Odessa Steppes massacre from Battleship Potemkin, which remains one of the most iconic sequences in film history. Well guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please give me a pass on this because I worked pretty hard on it. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Let's do the goodbye though in slow motion.